Hello students, this is Mr. Burns. Recently I visited Fort Snelling, and as you know, on our field trip this spring, Fort Snelling is one of the places that we're going to visit. So I want to tell you a little bit about the fort. First of all, it has a strong geographic position, so it was an ideal spot to build a fort. And the purpose of this fort was to keep the British out of the fur trade, and it was a meeting place for the Ojibwe and the Dakota. So the Army wanted to keep really good relations between the Ojibwe and the Dakota, because if they got to fighting, that interfered with the fur trade. In this picture here, we get a view of the fort in the background. That's the Minnesota River on the left and the Mississippi River, it's much bigger, on the right. The fort sits on a high bluff, so it's very easy to defend. In fact, in its entire history, the fort was never attacked. The Dakota have a word for where the two rivers come together, and it's called Bedote. So again, Bedote is the Minnesota River dumping into the Mississippi River, and it is a very sacred place for the Dakota. Rivers were very important in the 1700s and the 1800s because they were North America's transportation network. Now, this photo is taken from Fort Snelling, and you're looking across the Mississippi River. And this part of the Mississippi River is called the Mississippi River Gorge. So the Mississippi River is thousands of miles long, and this is the only gorge along the entire river. The gorge was carved by the power of St. Anthony Falls. So about 12,000 years ago, the falls were in the position where we're looking at now, and in the meantime, it has carved its way up north to its present-day location in Minneapolis. Another kind of cool thing about looking across this river here is that if you could go back in time before the Louisiana Purchase, you are looking at the western border of the United States before we purchased that land from France. In this aerial photograph, you see Pike Island, and just to the left of the Pike Island, kind of where the two highways intersect, is Fort Snelling. Fort Snelling was one of the Army's healthiest forts. Usually the forts were not good places to stay. The men would often get sick. Fort Snelling was a little bit healthier, and it was because the well inside the fort, which you'll see, was a shallow well. So in the summertime, when you had lots of water being drawn out for the men to drink, to supply water for the horses that were stationed at the fort, and for all the water that the women had to use to keep the laundry for the men clean and for their families clean, the well would go dry. So the men would have to trek back and forth a couple miles to this nearby cold water spring, where they would get clean, fresh drinking water, and they'd bring that back to the fort. So that's one of the reasons why the men stayed healthier at Fort Snelling. And again, cold water spring, like Bedote, was a sacred place for the Dakota. So that's what I have in this video. I will be showing you a couple more videos on Fort Snelling.